Good morning. It is almost 9:30 and we are going to do a little range test today. We're charged up to 100%, which on the battery management system, it's saying that's 299 miles. Now, it's been a long time since I've charged it to 100%, so there may be some flexibility in there. But we're just going to go off into the rural areas of Minnesota and try to hit as few stoplights as we can, but get the most range that we can. Let's hit the road and get going. All right, we are rolling. I originally thought maybe we would try this at the speed limit, but there's just no way I'd be causing so much traffic problems that we're doing 5 over, so here on this road it's 65 miles an hour, so we're going 70 and staying at the low end of the speed of traffic. Now that we're further out into the rural areas, it's not as big of a deal, but I'm going to try to stay consistently 5 over pretty much every road we're on. This route does have some stoplights and things like that, so we are occasionally stopping. At some point we're going to have to hit a drive-through for lunch. But this is a real-world test in the real world. Tires are at 44 to 45 psi. Temperature is 71 degrees. So low 70s. It's kind of fluctuating a little bit depending on where we are. There doesn't seem to be much breeze, so that's good. And our interior temperature is 71. So climate isn't having to work real hard. And I've got it on autopilot. We're going to head west to a town called Redwood Falls, pretty much straight west of the Twin Cities, but it is in a rural area, so this is kind of a test of if you have friends or family out in rural parts of the state where you're not necessarily on interstates. We've done plenty of testing on that, but there's also a lot of chargers along the interstates, so you can make those quick stops. But if you wanted to go out and back to a friend's in the country, we're going to test that out. We're just down to 89%, and we've gone about 30 miles, 29 miles, so we're doing well. It's a beautiful sunny day for a drive, and we'll catch you later. It is almost 11:30. We've been going for 2 hours here, and we've gone 110 miles, let's call it. We were on Highway 19 for quite a while, and then just took a detour, so we're working our way back to 19 from that detour, and then down to Redwood Falls, which will be our turnaround point. Right now our energy graph says we're going to get to Redwood Falls with 55%. That's gone down from like 63% since before we were on the detour. Right now our energy graph is saying we have 158 miles of range left based on the last 30 miles. So doing pretty well. Our average speed for the most part has been 65 miles an hour. There's some stretches where it's been 60, but then we had some of the bigger roads where we were on 72. So I would say generally we're at about 65 miles an hour average. Our watt hour per mile right now is 262, and we've used 29 kilowatts. We're going to get some food in Great Falls, take a stretch, do a restroom break, and then get back on the road. We just finished having lunch in the trunk. We had a little picnic with a Happy Meal and some cheeseburgers. And so now we're ready to get back on the road. We might stop at a park along the way and see if we can see a waterfall. Right now it is 12:18, 55%. We've gone 121.9 miles. I think we've got plenty to get back to Burnsville. So far pretty good. Alright, we are a little hot and sweaty, but we hiked up to Beaver Falls, which is just kind of a trickle right now, but still kind of some cool rock formations to climb around in. Joan got to splash her feet a little bit. And now we're going to take off. It is 1:32. It's now 87 degrees, so a little bit warmer. We're going to get cooking, and we've gone 133.4 miles and headed back. We'll see how it goes. We are down to 11%. We've got 24 miles to go, so we will be cutting it close. We are still going 70 miles an hour, up 169, headed toward the Twin Cities. And we shall see if we make it, or if we have to really, really slow down at the end. So I do have kind of a revelation that hit me, in that I always do these tests using autopilot, but about 25 miles ago I decided I would turn it off and see how it did, and we seem to be doing much better range-wise with autopilot on and just using cruise control. So I'd be interested to hear if anybody has any insights into that. I guess using that system would take more brain power, which would take more juice, but I just kind of assumed most of those systems are running all the time in the background anyway. But definitely, since I turned that off, it seems like we're getting way more miles out of each percentage. So interesting thing to keep an eye on. We're still hanging at 11%. Just past Jordan, Minnesota. The traffic is probably going to get heavy enough now where I won't be able to film anymore, so I'll do a touch-up and wrap-up when we get there, and just GoPro from here until then. We got back to Burnsville at 3% and drove around a little bit around town just to knock that last couple percentage off before we returned back here to home. Now that's the official rating according to the screen, and the energy graph was saying 0 miles, 0% left. But in other situations I've been in, I've noticed that below 0 there's quite a bit of buffer. Now, I wouldn't necessarily test this, especially if you're not familiar with it, but it's good to know that it's there. And I feel like because it had been so long since I had charged up to 100% or done a deep discharge, I probably did have quite a bit of buffer underneath 0. But with my daughter in the car, I didn't necessarily want to risk getting stuck So I left it at that, and we got a total of 255.2 miles, which obviously that's quite a bit less than the EPA rated range of 326, but I have a couple theories about that and a couple ideas about how to test that further later. If you get down to a low state of charge, or at zero or even below zero, and you start seeing the dashes across your acceleration line, like you would in cold weather on your regen line or at a high state of charge on your regen line, when you see those lines start creeping toward the center, you better find a place to charge right away. And I never got to that point on this test, so I know there was definitely some mileage there that we left on the table. Now, Tom Moloughney from Inside EVs and State of Charge with Tom Moloughney did a 70-mile-an-hour range test with a Model Y. And with that test, he got 275.4 miles at a constant 70 miles an hour. Now, I think there was probably enough buffer where I probably could have got maybe another 20 miles out of it. So I feel like this test could be considered relatively in line with what he did if you consider all the starts and stops. And another variable was that I was in chill mode, which limits your acceleration, which is great because you're not taking off from the stoplights as quickly. But I'm not sure if regen is necessarily going at full bore in chill mode. Also, I use creep mode, or I have been. I'm now testing switching over to hold mode. And for those that don't know, creep mode just lets your car roll forward or roll to a stop like an automatic transmission car, ICE car would do. So it's a little more comforting going from ICE to electric to have that kind of natural feel. But most EV owners prefer the hold method, and so I'm now, since this test, switching over to that and testing there. And what that gives you is regen all the way to the complete stop. And so there again, we probably could have eked out a little more by having a little more regen on those slower speeds in town, the stop signs, the turns, and that kind of thing. And like I said earlier in the video, I do want to test this autopilot theory. After talking to some other members of the Tesla community, they think it should be more efficient on autopilot than less, but that's a test for another day, and I want to see how efficient the car is over like a 100-mile stretch. And I want to repeat that 100-mile stretch with just me driving, with cruise control on, and using autopilot, and see what the variations are. If everybody's theory is correct, autopilot should be the most efficient, but we'll find out. But actually doing this test in the real world and not just on paper gave me quite a few interesting revelations that I want to share with you. The first is that we were on the road for a long time. Total time just driving was 4 hours and 45 minutes. Now, especially when you've got a child with you, if we had done that whole stretch in one leg, we would have been pretty sore and pretty cranky, hungry, definitely needed a restroom before that time was up. We did break it up in the middle. That's not included in that time. But also, I realized as we were out in Redwood Falls, I grew up in a small town, and whenever we would go to a metro area, our first stop in town was the gas station. And so although we went all the way out to Redwood Falls and back from the metro area, we did that on one charge. But when I lived even closer than that, in high school, if we were going up to the cities, we would definitely stop at the gas station and fill the tank before we left. And as I was looking at all the trucks and things in Redwood Falls, I thought all of these people would be starting here. And definitely, if you said, hey, you're going to the cities tomorrow, they'd fill up either tonight or in the morning before they left. It's just what you do. You prepare to have plenty of gas to do your route. And now with the supercharger open in Watertown, South Dakota, you could easily start from Redwood Falls and drive in any direction and get to more robust supercharging along the interstates. And one other note on the supercharger network. At this time, they are primarily along the interstates and major routes, but they're also spread out every 100 miles or 150 miles. And so once you're on those kind of routes, you have a lot more options of how far you want to push it to the next charger, to the nearer charger, how you want to play with it. Another interesting thing that shocked me was that when we stopped for lunch, we did everything like we normally would. We got out of the car, went inside, used the restroom, ordered food. Instead of eating inside, we took it out to the trunk and ate in the back of the car. But still, that wouldn't take any extra time. By the time we were ready to roll again, 35 minutes had passed. And we were not charging there. We were just taking a break from the 2 hours and 11 minutes we'd already been in the car. So if we weren't charging, why is that important? Well, in my mind, 10 or 15 minutes had passed away. And I think a lot of people would think, oh yeah, when we stop on the road, we're only stopping for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But time goes by faster, especially when you're dealing with kids. And that 35 minutes went by in a flash. We were not trying to go slow. We weren't dilly-dallying. We just did what we would normally do. So had we been at a supercharger at the same time we were getting lunch, 35 minutes is plenty to get on your way. During our big road trip out to the mountains earlier this year, our average stop time was 28 minutes, I believe, and we overcharged at almost every one of those. So 35 minutes is ample for anybody to charge up at a supercharger. So I would encourage you, if you don't own an EV yet and you're concerned about that, keep a little piece of paper or notes on your phone or something in the car, and when you take a trip and make stops, is that 5-minute gas stop really 5 minutes? See how far you travel every day, or when you do big trips, pay attention to when you stop, how often, and how long. And that'll give you an idea of what kind of EV you could live with. I bet you'd be really surprised at how much less you drive and how much longer your stops are than what you think. Now, another interesting aside, we went out to Redwood Falls and back. Had we kept going straight west, we could have easily gotten to and then past the Watertown Supercharger with miles to spare. Definitely in good weather conditions, I would feel comfortable driving all the way out of the state west, which I know logically you should be able to with that kind of mileage, but to actually do it or have driven that many miles, it's much more than almost anybody does in a day. So with our stop at Beaver Falls and our stop in Redwood Falls, our whole day trip was about 6 hours and 18 minutes, which again is more than most people will do in a day trip. You might do that length of time, but probably not drive that far. I know we go to state and regional parks a lot, but usually they're closer to home. And then if you're going on a bigger road trip, you would find supercharging or destination charging closer to where you are. So would I have liked to push it further and try to get closer to 300 or 320 miles? Yes, and maybe I'll do something like that in the future. But for now, I thought this was a good, very accurate test. And although 255 miles isn't 326, like I said, it's more than most people are ever going to need on day-to-day trips. So thanks for coming along on this trip. Now that my daughter's back in school, I'll be doing a little more testing with a little more road warrior mindset of getting the max range we can and doing a lot of different tests. So look for those coming in the future. I also want to catch up with some other EV drivers before things get too cold and hear what their experiences are. But thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.